time. I know it could potentially be a weird time of day. I don't know. I just didn't want to let the user group fade away, so I thought we'd all try to connect here. It's a great day today because we have a Zen master, we have some mapping. So I just want to welcome everyone, and I'm going to hop back in after a bit because we have Mark is joining us. Mark Reed is joining us from London. So we're on that time zone. So my big joke is Sarah was going to join us from London, and I mean I thought I was having a chaotic time, so she's going to join us at maybe our next tug session. And I guess Zen Master's just running groups over there in London because we have Mark, who is a friend of Sarah's, and he's going to be our first presenter today. So Mark, you can take it away. Let me stop the share.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bonnie. I'll just check that you can hear me okay.
Yes, can hear you fine.
Fantastic. Okay, so let me go ahead, share my screen here. All right, so hi everyone. And thanks again, Bonnie, for the introduction. So I'm just going to talk through a couple of new features that have come into Tableau in this latest release, 2020.1, that was released a couple of months ago. And we're going to be looking at, in particular, buffer calculations and animated transitions. So there are a lot of new features come out in this latest release. We had some enhancements to explain data. We had some new connector improvements. Dynamic parameters was a really big one. This is one of the most requested ideas on the idea forum. But the thing we're going to look at today, as I say, the buffer calculations and easy dashboard export buttons, and then viz animations. So what is a buffer? So a buffer allows you to visualize the distance around point locations. So obviously currently at the moment you can visualize your points on a map with latitude and longitude, and you can do that with circles. But what the buffers allow you to do is actually specify a particular spatial measurement of those circles or buffers, so you can see those on a map. So the way that they differ to a circle mark is that if you just have a normal circle mark on a map and you resize that with the slider that you see on the screen there, it's you're not giving that a spatial measurement. It's just kind of an arbitrary sizing, and you change that and it kind of updates as you move the slider around. And the way this differs to the buffer is, if you look at this screen here on the left, we can see the difference with a circle mark and a buffer, and they both look exactly the same. But as you zoom out there, the circle mark resizes in relation to the map underneath, so actually it kind of becomes bigger. Whereas the buffer spatial object maintains its aspect ratio with the underlying map, so it appears smaller, as does everything else on the map. So the way you create a buffer is using this calculation here, which you see on screen, and it takes 3 arguments. So the first argument is a spatial point, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And the second one is a radius for the buffer, and then finally is a unit of measurement for that radius. So that could be kilometers or meters or miles or feet. And just to talk a bit more about the spatial point for the first one. So if you don't have spatial data in the file that you're connecting to, but you do have latitude and longitude, you can create the spatial point using another spatial function, which is the make point function, which Tableau released last year, a few versions ago. So why would we use buffers? So I thought we'd talk through a potential scenario of how you might want to use a buffer calculation. So let's imagine that we want to open up a new coffee shop in London. There's a few questions that we'd probably want to answer to be able to do that. So, for example, where are the existing coffee shops, i.e. our competition? We want to know where there are available locations to either buy or rent a new coffee shop. And then we look to understand how many of our competitors are within range within the trade area of each of those potential locations. So as an example then, I'm going to connect to two files here. So this is the first file, and it has all of the existing coffee shops in London. And I should just say this is just dummy data. And then I have a second file which I'm connecting to, and this just has 6 rows of data, and this is the 6 locations that are the potential locations that I'm looking to either buy or rent for my own coffee shop. And then what I would do is put a buffer location around each of those 6 locations there, which you see on the screen. It's the yellow circles. And then what I would look to do is join these 2 files together using an intersect join to then see how many of the competition fall within each of those buffers. So the way that that intersect join would look like is on the screen here. So this is the data source pane in Tableau Desktop. And you can see on the left-hand side at the top there, we've got our 2 data sources. We've got the extract and extract 1. And on the left side of the join, I'm using a make point latitude, longitude calculation there to generate that spatial point, because we need to have spatial objects on both sides of this join. And on the right side, the calculation, the join calculation doesn't fit in the top there. So I've just brought that out underneath, and you can see that I'm using that buffer calculation that I showed you previously, again with the make point to generate the spatial point based on the latitude and longitude. And then I'm going to create these buffers of 350 meters around each of those points, and then I'm going to join those together. So just to explain a little bit more about how these intersect joins work, just a visual example here. So on the left, I have some spatial points from my first file. And on the right-hand side, I'm just showing an example of one spatial point with one buffer object on the right-hand side. And what the intersect join does is it brings these 2 files together. And if you kind of imagine them aligning all of the points based on their latitude and longitudes. And then what will happen is the intersect will just keep the points on the left that overlap with the buffer object. And all of the other points will drop out of that join and disappear. So what you are left with is what you see on the screen there. So how would this look on the map in Tableau? So again, we have our original file with the existing locations. Then we have our buffer objects for the 6 potential locations, and we join those together. And the result is the existing locations that fall within those buffer areas. So this then allows us to kind of answer some spatial questions about those new locations. So for example, on the left, you can see there's a lot of competition. So is that the best location to open a new shop? Maybe we want to pick one of the other locations. So it's a really powerful feature, allows us to start answering spatial questions and start to do trade area analysis and things like that. So another way that we might want to use the function is just connecting to one single file, but then creating the buffers dynamically. So not joining to another file this time, but just clicking on individual points on the map and creating a buffer on any point that we click on. So the way that we would do this is by using, I have the same buffer calculation in the middle of that calculation you can see on screen, with the only difference being I'm using a couple of parameters there. So I'm not hard coding the size or the unit of the measurement. I'm using parameters which will allow me to adjust that at a later point, and I'll show you that in a second. And then I'm wrapping that inside of a conditional statement, which is that if statement there, which basically says if the point is inside of this set, which I'm calling s.locations, then create the buffer. And if the location is not in the set, then don't create the buffer. And the way that we put the spatial points into the buffer is using a set action. And so I'll just demonstrate in this next screen there how that works. So as I move around and click on these points, the set action is putting those points into the set, and then that triggers the calculation to be true and return the buffer, and then you see that buffer created for those particular points there. And you can then see that I'm using the parameters in the lower right corner there to adjust the size of the buffers and the unit of measurements as well. And just one other thing to note there, you can see when I first start clicking, I just have one point at a time. And then as I move on to the next point, the previous point disappears. You can also hold down the control key to select multiple points to bring multiple points into the set so they all get a buffer. Okay, so so this is pretty powerful, it's pretty useful. One thing I thought when I was building this is it would be quite nice to be able to have the buffers be different sizes opposed to having them all be the same size and same color and so on. So I looked back to a project I was working on actually end of last year where I built out a map here which allowed me to click on points and build lines and build a path way through this map. And this uses a technique developed by Jonathan Drummey, who's a Tableau Zen master, and it uses parameters as a data source. So as you can see now, when I start to click on these points, what it's doing is recording a unique identifier for each of the points that I click on into a text parameter. And then as I click on each subsequent point, it's sending the existing value of the parameter back into the same parameter. And it's also appending on the location of the next point that I click on. So as you click on more points over time, you build up a long string of values which you can then pass out and do other things with, such as calculate the distance between the points. And then based on that distance, I'm then calculating a very approximate carbon emissions for each leg of that journey based on the method of transport that was used, whether it was a plane or a car and so on, and building that out over time. So I decided to try and use that same technique here with the buffers, just going back to this dashboard again. So this time I'm using just one file this time, but what I've done is put a flag, a column in that data source to identify about 13 points of which are potential locations to either buy or to rent, and they're identified by that blue star there. So the first thing I'm going to go and do is go and click on 6 of these points just purely based on location alone, of my knowledge of the general knowledge of the area, to find out a bit more about those areas, such as how many competition coffee shops are in each of those locations. And that's built up there. And the next thing I can then do is go around and assess each of those, find out how much competition there is. So for example, there's 25 competitors within that first buffer. There's 3 in this one at the top, and so on. And you can see that I'm also capturing that information in a table in the lower left-hand corner as well. That allows me to kind of assess all of the different competition, the different areas. You see there's quite a big range. So for example, the one on the left there in Soho has, I think, 25 competitors, whereas another one only has 2. So the next thing I want to do is actually adjust some of these buffers and make them either larger or smaller. So this first one here, I want to make this a lot smaller because I can't realistically use that full trade area. So I'm going to use these custom UI elements I've built here to resize those, and I can resize from 500 meters down to 150. I'm going to make this one 150 there, and then next one, I'm going to make this one a bit smaller as well, not quite as small, but we'll go down to 200 meters on this one. And then the next one, we can probably make this a bit bigger because it only has 3 competitors. So we'll go up to 400 meters. And I'll continue on there. And you can see in the lower left as well, the number of competitors is updating in each buffer. You can see the size of the buffer is changing. And the buffer that I'm working on is highlighted with a kind of triangle there. Okay, great. So I've updated the size of all these buffers there. And the next thing that I want to do now is kind of assign them a target type. So either a primary or secondary or other. So this first one here, I'm going to assign that to be other. So I think it's quite a small trade area. I'm not too sure about how much business we could do there. And likewise in the top right, I'll leave that as other as well. I quite like the one in the top left. It's small, but there's no competition in the lower half of the trade area. So I'll make that primary. And I'll make this one by the river primary as well. We get a lot of tourist traffic by the river there, but I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller because there's two competition just on the edge, so I'll just knock those out by making it a little bit smaller. And then the remaining two, I'll allocate these to be secondary targets. Okay, great. So I have everything assigned out here, and I think just on reflection, I'm going to remove the two green ones. The other ones, I'll just remove those from the dashboard. I don't think I want to keep those in there. So great. So I now have everything that I want here. I've got my primary location, secondary. I can see the competitors. What I want to do now is actually share this with some colleagues of mine, and they don't have access to my Tableau server, so I need to find another way to share this. So this brings me to the next bit of functionality that we're going to look at, which is these export buttons. So Tableau's added these buttons which you can just drag into the dashboard, and they allow you to export the view out to different file formats. So you can export to PDF or to an image or to a PowerPoint. And you can also customize those buttons to be either an image, or you can customize the text. So this is something you could do previously using the menu within Server, the menu bar at the top, but this just makes it a bit more flexible and a bit more customizable. So I've gone ahead and added one of these buttons in the lower right-hand corner there. You can see I've got a small kind of icon of a map. And I'm just going to click on that button there, and it's going to bring up the dialog to put the settings in for a PDF. So I'll click OK, and I'll give that a file name and save that. And then that'll just take a few seconds to generate that PDF file, and that'll pop up on screen. And that's great. It's got everything we need there with the map and the locations, what are their primary, secondary, and the table of the information as well. So that's everything I need to send over to my colleagues, and then based on the information we can have a discussion and then take the next decision that we want to do. So we might go out and to visit some of these locations and confirm whether or not it's the right place to open our new coffee shop. So hopefully that was a useful kind of walkthrough of a potential scenario of how you might use these buffer calculations, and I'm sure you can think of many others as well. So it's a really powerful feature. I think a lot of uses for that. Okay, so the last thing we're going to look at is the animated transitions, the Viz animations feature. So to start off, I'm just going to walk through a series of charts. So I don't have any animations on here, but I just want to kind of walk through an example of how you might you might be in a meeting, for example, with somebody who's presenting some information to you. You're not familiar with the information or the charts and or the data within them, and you're just seeing this for the first time. So very much like what we're doing here on the call today. And I just want you to try and follow along and try and understand what's happening as we transition between these different charts. Okay, so at the moment we're looking at average monthly sales over the last 10 years. And you can see that in 2009, the average monthly sales were about 340 million. And by 2018, the average monthly sales were 1.3 billion. I'm just going to change the view to look at the actual monthly sales now by month. And I'm going to add on just a label at the start and end of each year. And when we do that, we can start to see the seasonality come through there, and the sales really peak up towards the end of the year as we come into the holiday season. And I'm going to change the view now to more easily compare the individual months. So we can now compare all the Decembers together much more easily. And we can see, particularly in the last 3 years, the sales for November and December took a bit of a jump up, which is interesting to see. So the next thing I want to do is actually combine all these sales together. So I want to see the total sales for the month of December over the 10 years. So I'll bring them together, and we can see that the total sales for December were 11 billion. And then I'm going to break that out, but not by year now, but by category. And when you do that, you can see that that 11 billion for December was about 5.5 billion for non-store retailing, and the remainder for clothing and food and other categories that you can see on the screen there. Okay, so how easy was it to understand the changes as we move between the different graphs? I'm guessing some of you may have followed along, no problem at all, but you may have had some challenges as well. And some of the challenges that you may have faced would have been around, for example, the changing of the granularity of time. So we moved from looking at the dates by year to by month. We also looked at changing the dates from a continuous view to a discrete view of the dates, by which I mean the years were going sequentially across the screen to looking at them in parallel with the lines kind of stacked on top of each other. And finally, we looked at changing the granularity of the dimensions. So we had the sales broken out by year, and then we looked at total aggregated sales, and then finally we're looking at sales by category. So, when you talk about some of these changes, they seem fairly straightforward, but just, bear in mind that you're seeing all of this data for the very first time. It can be a bit of a challenge to keep up with, what this data is and the different views. I know I'm probably guilty of this myself sometimes, if I'm very familiar with data and I've analyzed it myself, I know exactly what it means, but I'm presenting it out to people who've never seen it before, and it can sometimes be forgetful of that. So what can we do to help reduce those challenges? Well, one of the things we can do is use something called object constancy. And this is described by Mike Bostock, who's the creator of D3, as when a graphical element that represents a particular data point can be tracked visually through the transition. And this lessens the cognitive burden by using pre-attentive processing of motion rather than sequential scanning of labels. So we're talking about pre-attentive attributes there. So you may be familiar with the pre-attentive attributes. You may have seen a chart similar to this before. And it uses things like color or size of circles and scatter plots, or the length of bars, for example. And I was reminded of some of these pre-attentive attributes last year when I saw a talk by John Schwabis. He was talking about the use of animation in data visualization. And he was talking particularly about the pre-attentive attributes of motion, so things like direction and velocity. So the new feature that Tableau has brought in now with the animation allows us to make use of these pre-attentive attributes in our dashboards and our visualizations that we use to tell stories and share data and information. So to demonstrate that, let's take another look at that same data, those same charts that we showed before, but this time with the animation in place, and let's see if it is a bit more easier to follow along. Hopefully it will be. So we start off again with this same view of the average sales by month over the last 10 years. And then we're going to transition that into the actual sales for each month. And then we can start to see the seasonality come through there. I'm then going to change the view to align up all the months over the 10 years. So it's easier to compare, for example, all the Januaries, all the Februaries through to all the Decembers. So all the Januaries will move over to the left and all the Decembers will move over to the right. You can track the years as they move across the screen here. Okay, so now we can easily compare the individual months. And the next thing I want to do is actually collapse all these lines together. So they'll all come together and aggregate the sales for each of those months. And you'll see that happen there. And then we can see the total sales for December were about 11 billion. And then finally, we'll just break that line back out again now. And this time we'll break out by category. So you'll see the line split out. And the values come down to the bottom of the screen for the non-storytelling. And we can see that about 5.5 billion were for that top category and the remainder for the other ones. Okay, so I'm just going to stop my video to hopefully save some battery there as we move on. Okay, so move on to the next screen here. So one second. Okay, so hopefully you found it a bit easier to follow along with the transition in place. So another quote from Mike Bostock here says that animated transitions are pretty, but they also serve a purpose. They make it easier to follow the data. So as an example of that, what I'm going to do is just walk through another example with this scatter plot here. And I'm just going to ask you to try and follow along. I'm going to pick one of these circles that you see on screen here and just try and follow it as it moves across the screen. So what I have here is the year on the pages shelf. So there's another 3 years of data to follow this. 2017 through 2019. So these circles are going to move 3 times. So just pick one of those circles, and then we'll make the move now as we go ahead. Okay, and I'm guessing that you may have found that quite tricky. I know I did when I tried to follow that myself. So we're going to try that again. This time I'm going to add in the pre-attentive attribute of colors. It's one of those pre-attentive attributes we looked at earlier on. And we're going to do this again, and hopefully you find it a little bit easier to follow along with the color in place now. So we'll just try that now. So pick one of these circles again, and we'll try that. Okay, so hopefully you found that a bit easier. And obviously the brain is able to process the color much more quickly than it is in terms of reading the individual labels in each of these marks. So that's a little bit quicker. But now we're going to try this again with the transitions in, and just see how easier you find it this time. So again, just pick one of these circles now and try and follow along. Okay, and I'm pretty sure you will have found that much easier to follow along. So these transitions are really powerful, and I think especially when you're presenting this kind of information where you are moving marks around the screen like this and scatter plots and so on, it can make a huge difference to the audience in terms of trying to follow the story that you're presenting. They're so powerful, in fact, in terms of this pre-attentive attribute of motion. We can actually remove the other attributes. So we could remove the coloring, could remove the labels, and still follow along. So just try this one more time. We'll just go through this final time with no other attribute but just the motion. So again, just pick one of these circles and we'll just try and follow along. Okay, so again, I hope you found that relatively easy to follow along, even with no labeling and no color. So I'll say the really powerful feature, and of course this is not really anything new as such in the data viz world. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the work of Hans Rosling and his famous presentation that he did for the TED Talks many years ago. That TED Talk has now been watched over 14 million times. And I remember watching this a number of years ago and was really struck by the effectiveness
Oh, I didn't realize we were done. Were you done, Mark? Because you were talking about Hans and then I couldn't hear you. Wait, hold on. Let's try to get Hans back. I mean, Hans. Let's try to get Mark back.
I think the video just cut off or stopped.
So yeah, he was saying something about trying to save power. Can you get him back, Rasta, or should we just move on?
I don't see him in the panelist view. I think he lost his connection.
Yeah, he'll be able to log back in once he gets connection again.
Let me just let him know that we're. I'll let him, if he comes back, I'll let him interrupt me, but I just want to. But just in case he can't, what I want to say, let me share my screen. Is, him talking about Hans Rosling. I was at, I think maybe 2 of the Tableau conferences where he was actually live, and it was something to see. And he uses a lot of these tools that Mark was talking to us about. And what I like about the things Mark was introducing, Mark, is that you?
Hey, Bonnie.
Oh, here, what, you want to come back and finish? Because I know you were close, right?
Sure, yeah, sorry about that. We just ran out of power there, so I've reconnected. I thought I had a bit more than half an hour, but obviously not.
I'm going to
So,
stop
yeah, I can go ahead.
share and just let you come back and finish. I was just
Okay.
sharing about the, I saw Hans, I think twice at Tableau conferences.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that was really quite an opportunity.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, it's an amazing talk for sure.
Oh.
Okay, great. So let me just pick up there. Apologies for the
Well, I heard you say, I'm going to turn off my video to see, and then you went away.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, so I'm not sure exactly what we cut out, but yeah, basically, yeah, it was an amazing talk, obviously, by Hans there, and I was really struck by the talk and the way he presented that information, the effectiveness of the visualizations that he was presenting, and of course his presentation style is amazing. So so yeah, so when this new feature came into the beta at the end of last year, was very keen to have a go at trying to reproduce a couple of these visualizations that Hans had produced. So I went to the Gapminder site and I was able to download some of the data that was used there. And it's actually more up to date, so a few more years of data in there. So put that together in an animation. So I'll finish up with this this final visualization, this animation. It walks through some of these charts. And as it plays through, I'll just talk through some of the kind of technical things that are happening in the background in terms of Tableau and what I've done there. So it's set up in a very similar way. We have these circles represent the regions, and as you click on them, they change the level of detail, and then you can start to see the countries underneath those. And there's some parameter actions in place there that trigger that change of detail. And then you can actually click the play button, and that play button is now on the server, so you can use the pages shelf on server as well. And as we play through, you see the countries move there. So the births per woman is reducing and the life expectancy is increasing. And as you hover over, you can see the metrics for each of the countries or the regions as you change the granularity of the detail there. And there's some custom buttons in the top there to change the granularity of all of circles. We go back to the start, and then we can change the measures that are on the axes. So we're going to put GDP per capita on the x-axis, child survival on the y-axis there. And we'll play that through again. See the GDP per capita increasing, the child survival rate increasing as the years go by. And it's quite interesting there, as you hover over, you can see the kind of the variation of the values for the countries in each of the regions. I think that was really one of the points that Hans was, emphasizing in his talk, is that, we sometimes think
I think London is just a bridge too far. I think it's really hard with international connections, and I know he was finishing. I would love to bring him back for Q&A if he can, but I understand with the time, it's quite late there. I think it's after 11 p.m. But I'm going to move on and try to see if we can get Tech Systems to just talk for a minute. They do a lot of hiring. I'm trying to see if they're on the call. They do a lot of hiring for us Tableau folks. So I want it for you to see. Let me see. There we go. Now, I don't know if Brianna's on the call. Let me see, I'm getting a message.
It says Bree's here.
Okay, Bree, are you unmuted?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Really
great.
quick, I just wanted to have a break, especially since in this pause where we don't know if we're going to be able to get Mark back for questions. But if you have questions for him and you want to put them in the Q&A. I will make sure he gets them, and then we'll follow up with you folks after. Now, Tech Systems has been a really good supporter of our Tableau user group, and we didn't want that to end just because we're not face-to-face and live. So I wanted to give them like 10 minutes to kind of just talk to you and let you know a little bit about what they do and maybe some of the skills they need for some of the positions they're trying to fill.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. So hello, my name's Bree. I am a technical recruiter at Tech Systems. I support the enterprise application and data analytics space. So I definitely work with anyone in the business intelligence area, or you know, programming or architecture, what have you. So if you all have any questions, I'd be happy to help. Obviously right now with you know, everything going on in the world with the COVID stuff, you know, some things have been on hold, but we still do have you know, multiple open opportunities right now in the nation, also, you know, here locally. So if you guys are looking for something, we definitely have, I know Craig, I don't know if Craig is on here right now, but we help one of our clients, you know, we actually, Tech Systems partners with Tableau. We have a partnership with them, so we go into different companies and help them with, you know, creating just with their big projects and bringing, you know, these technologies into the, you know, their daily projects and whatnot. So I think if you guys have any questions, I would love to answer them. I don't know if Craig or Kevin or anyone else is on. I can't really see, but feel free to ask away, or I can also leave my email on here if you guys want to just chat with me on that way. That'd be great.
I'm doing a lot of talking while I'm muted. If you have any questions for Mark, he is here. So you can send them over in the Q&A, or even a chat if it's because Mark is in there now. But don't worry about it. If you think of anything, just send it along, because he did quite a lot of information on the buffering and the animations, which are two tools that I've just started using. My buffering I used in a local Guilford County map I'm doing on firearm violence. And what I did is I created buffering around Moses Cone Hospital, because that's where we're getting the most accurate count. We're using that as the counts of patients that are brought in there for gunshot wounds, because it's a trauma to a level 2 trauma center. So that's an application of it right there. And the animations, as you can see, are quite relevant as well. And I'll let Rasta look and see what's over in the Q&A before we switch on to our next speaker, Ozzy. Or I'll just read these. Are you still there, Bree? They want to know if Tech Systems is a recruiter or a consulting agency. I would say both, but I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, sorry guys. So we are the IT staffing and services firm. So we, you know, support these clients with, you know, as far as contracting roles, permanent roles. We definitely do smaller projects within, you know, help companies out on, you know, the services level. We provide services for any company as well. So basically we, you know, here locally in the, you know, Triad area in North Carolina, we support about 120 different companies around here locally. And so we, you know, if there's any given need within some of the managers that we work with within these companies, we reach out to anyone that would be open opportunities, or just, you know, we network with anyone around here on LinkedIn or anything, and then just kind of talk about what you guys or what anyone, you know, would like to do, we've definitely had multiple business intelligence opportunities open. So, you know, if we help you out, we provide, you know, contract roles, permanent roles. We also, you know, provide benefits for contracting, which I know a lot of some companies don't provide that. So it's definitely a benefit. So if anyone's interested in that, we love to help. We also like to partner, you know, just network in general and see if we can help you guys out within your company or your teams as well, just to provide the services that we can, you know, that we partner with and whatnot too. If that answers your question, just let me know if you need.
There was a request for you to include, I think it was to include your email, if you want to just put it in the chat.
I can absolutely do that.
I'm trying to keep up with these. Let's see. So we got the email from Bree. And I think you answered most of these other questions. So are there any other questions? Anything for Mark? All right. Okay. What we're going to do then is we're going to move on and meet our next speaker, who I'm very excited also to hear from, Ozzy Campos, and his work in the aviation industry and with QGIS and, you know, some of the Mapbox applications. So let me shut down the chat for now. It'll be filling up, and we will go into the questions if there's anything we haven't addressed. And I'm going to stop my share and turn it over to
All right.
Ozzy.
Let me just put this on full screen. So thanks a lot for having me. You know, ideally would meet in person, but I think this is a good forum to kind of collaborate and maybe just share some ideas and just kind of show what we're all working on. But basically, I'm going to be talking about spatial data and remote sensing and some of the work that I'm doing and some of the research out there. And then we'll kind of shift gears and talk about within Tableau, working with Shapefiles and KML. They're kind of similar. And then we'll also look at the Mapbox and map styling API. Is there a question in the chat? Okay. All right. So as far as an intro for me, right now I'm doing remote sensing research. I'm over at Virginia Tech. I used to live close to Greensboro. That's how I kind of got involved with the user group. And I'm also a mapping and localization engineer with Torque Robotics. So I've kind of shifted away a little bit from the data analysis side, but I still use Tableau a lot for almost kind of like a hobby and kind of a finalizing data visualizations. I think it's a really great tool. Really easy to it's really easy to kind of show your work and play around with it, and especially the data exploration side. And I like the data, the dynamics of it, right? And I think there's all different kinds of connections with different fields. You know, I'm working on the engineering side, but, you know, data analysis, it's a really good kind of like a glue and a conduit between all different industries and, industries and disciplines. And some of the things that you learn with data analysis, you can apply them pretty much immediately to something else. So I'm using a lot of the data analysis tools in the robotics industry now. So, all right. So as far as remote sensing, you know, I don't like over defining things, but it's basically detecting information from a distance. So you have stuff like satellite imagery and aerial imagery and point cloud imagery. So like point cloud imagery would be something like a self-driving car, where you have LiDAR, which is millions of different lasers that are going out and determining how far different objects are from the origin point. So it's broken up into mainly two different categories. So on the passive side, you have something like imagery and infrared. So it's passively gaining information. So energy from the sun is going through the atmosphere, reflecting off Earth, and then going back to the detector. Where on the other side, you have active. So that's actually generating energy and, like I said, sending out sonar or lasers to come up with a better understanding of the object that you're trying to detect. So once you have that information, you know, that's where spatial data and spatial analysis comes in, is finding those relationships between objects. So I'll switch over to Tableau real quick. there's two major, I guess, spatial categories. So you have, on the left-hand side, you have a raster map, and on the right side, you have vector map. So raster, at the end of the day, it's a collection of pixels. So there's several thousand pixels in here. So you can get information from each individual one, whether at the pixel level or you start getting into the computer vision side and identifying objects. So one of the major things that you're doing in remote sensing is looking at this image over here and then turning it into contextual information. So the vector map on the right is a town in Virginia, and you can see where the buildings are, the outlines, the roads, the terrain. So I can actually come up with actionable information from the one on the right, whereas the one on the left, you're trying to extract information out of. And that's kind of the core of remote sensing is, building those relationships in there. All right, so just to kind of switch gears a little, remote sensing, it's a really good place to be in right now. It's changing rapidly over the past 10 years. You've seen a lot of private companies coming up with cube satellites and really high resolution imagery. So just an example, the one on the top left, I've got a relationship with Planet Labs. So, and that's a cube satellite. It's, a few pounds, and it has really high resolution imagery. And I think Planet, they put up 16 of these cube satellites. So it's going over Earth numerous times. I think overall it's about once a day. It goes over every point on Earth. Whereas the one on the bottom right, this high resolution reconnaissance satellite from the 1970s, you can see how large it is. And it's kind of crazy that the one on the top left dramatically outperforms the one on the top right. And if you're, just kind of side note, if you're interested in some of the subject, the book Secret Empire, I just finished it. It's really good. It just talks about the development of high resolution reconnaissance satellites and how it's kind of led up to remote sensing as we know it today. So here is some of the imagery on the top left. That is from a cube satellite. It's really high. It's each pixel is less than a meter. So you can, make out people and shadows, and it's really high powered. The one on the bottom right is from the satellite from the 1960s, 70s, which was ironically called Corona. So you can see, you can still glean information from this, but there has been a lot of development in the field. All right, so let me just move this. So as far as resources, examples, I wanted to give you enough to kind of like do your own work. There's a lot of resources out there that are open source and really powerful. The two major ones that I would recommend, and I'll show them to you in a second, is Google Earth Engine and Microsoft AI for Earth. Google Earth Engine is different than Google Maps or Google Earth Pro, which you might be familiar with. Switch over to my web. So this is Google Earth Engine. It's a planetary scale platform for Earth science data and analysis. And there's actually petabytes worth of data in here. So if you look at the data sets, there is satellite imagery from the 1970s till today. And it has a code editor. So if you're at all familiar with JavaScript or Python, you can interact with it. You can come up with relationships, and you can bring in information about surface temperature or climate or high resolution or one of the European ones, and come up with an understanding and create a metric that might be useful for your own industry. So just a quick example of that. I already wrote the script here. But this is based on work from the University of Maryland, where they built basically a massive classification model to identify deforestation all across the Earth. And there are numerous terabytes that this is going through, and it is identifying on a yearly basis where deforestation is happening. So as you can see, this is Indonesia. So it might take a second to load here. This is Indonesia, and one of the issues in Indonesia are palm oil reservations. So a lot of times they are chopping down kind of prime tropical jungles and tropical forests and replacing them with palm oil. And there's a lot of issues with the different governments reporting different numbers. So we built this tool, and like I said, I'm kind of extrapolating from the team from University of Maryland, but it's almost like an auto detector. So you can tell where exactly, and you can get it down to like 16-day intervals, where exactly deforestation is happening. So if I was a government or if I was a nonprofit, I can figure out where the hotspots are, and they're using this in Brazil and Peru, throughout the Amazon and Africa, where deforestation is happening and where you would put your resources. So that's just kind of an example of what you can do with remote sensing. Ideally, I was going to kind of extract this and bring it into Tableau, but the size of the data, it was kind of slowing everything down, so I shifted gears. And the other one that I mentioned, so this is Google Earth Engine. Microsoft, they're a little bit later to the game, but they're putting a lot of resources into high resolution. And it's, for the most part, it's open source. So if you're at all interested, I would encourage you to go to these sites and get an account, and you can just kind of play around with the data. You might have to learn some JavaScript or some Python, but they have really good, if you go to Google Earth Engine, the platform and the documentation is really well defined. So in a matter of a few weeks, you can get really comfortable with extracting this information and using it for your own industries. All right, so let's kind of shift gears here. I'll go over to Tableau now. So one of the things, when I was using Tableau a lot and the data analysis side of things, I never really used Shapefiles. So Shapefiles, it's a format, it was developed by Esri, but it's become kind of like the standard open source now, along with KML, which is a Google data type. But basically, that is how you create those vector files. So it's points, polygons, and lines. And the reason that these are really powerful is the federal government, the state government, academic, industry, they all release really rich data sets with shapefiles. And at the time, I had been using something like QGIS over here, which is kind of a nice interface for using these shapefiles. But the problem with it is I had all this other data, and I didn't really know how to incorporate it in with Tableau. So I'll kind of show you the the basics of working with shapefiles within Tableau. So it's really not too difficult. On my end, I try to do most of the analysis in something like QGIS or ArcGIS or Alteryx beforehand, and I make sure I'm like cleaning the data just so I'm bringing in just exactly what I need. So as you see right here under the data source, basically how it works is you have all this attribute data. So there's an object ID over here, some information about the address, name, and then this over here is the actual spatial object. So it's the geometry, and it's telling you that this is a polygon. If I was going to bring in a different one, it could be, points or lines. So it's really as easy as bringing in your geometry. So, and this is that town in Virginia, Rocky Mount. So as you scroll in, you realize, you scroll in a little bit more, it comes in as one object. It's a lot of data here. So this is all one thing. So you have to break it up and by the detail. So I want granularity based on the ID, add all members. So now I have an ID for each individual object. And I'll kind of skip over the rest of it. But this is what you end with. So you can put a map, put a good image behind it, and you have all of these individual objects. Where's my legend? And it's colored over here by the type of the building. So you can get all this information from Shapefiles, from the government, or whatever you're trying to analyze. So in this one right here, it's a nice clean map. It's got a good background to it. And I didn't realize how easy it was to incorporate your Shapefiles with the data that you're working with, right? All right, so let's move on. So the next step is, and if you did want to play around with the Shapefiles, you can get them anywhere online from like a local government, and just kind of do it on your own and just kind of practice. But it's a relatively easy process. All right, so working with the Mapbox API. So I have the website over here. One of the things that you can do is create really unique background images for your maps. So this is data for like a store clustering model that I did. I did the analytics in Alteryx, but put the visualization in Tableau, but I wanted something a little bit different for the background. So if you are interested in creating the styles, Mapbox actually has a kind of a studio, so you can create your own background. I was playing around with the font over here, and this is kind of like a Western style that it had like a starter template, and you can break it up. You can create really cool interactions. So as you see, as you scrolling in, all the secondary streets start coming in to focus. And then it's really obvious, it's really nice transitions. It's really well developed. So to do that, let me just go back here. So this is the Mapbox Studio. You have to create an account with Mapbox. I believe it's a pay-as-you-go for the most part, but it's, I think, several thousand interactions with the API. But if I go to this new Western, go to Share, and then come down to this third party, and then copy the integrate, and then down to Tableau over here. These are all a little bit different, so most of these won't work with Tableau except for this one right here. Copy it, and then you're going into Maps, Background Maps, Manage Maps, Add, Mapbox Maps, Western 2, and then you paste this URL, and it'll automatically create a new map for you. So it's a really nice feature, especially in your organization. If you wanted to differentiate the way you built maps, you could come here to the studio, create your own custom feel to it, and then and then export it and use it throughout all your Tableau workbooks. So it's a really nice product. So after that, the second part is that I wanted to test out the Mapbox analytics. So this is a little bit, I had kind of mixed feelings with it. So this is if you navigate to Geographic Analytics extension for Tableau, and this will only work for a Linux or a Mac. It won't work for Windows right now. And you install this, it'll create a .trex file, which is an extension file. I just put mine in my dashboard, in my download folder. And if you create a dashboard, go to Extensions, drag it in, My Extensions, and then just navigate to wherever the Trex file is, so download. And I've already done that, so I don't want to do it twice. It will give you a map like this that is linked to one of your data sets. So it is a little bit it's a little bit finicky, especially to get started. So they have a configure over here, and your data has to contain exactly the name latitude and longitude. I was trying to do it with lat long, and it wasn't working. So you have to be really specific with that. That's kind of the main sticking point. But they do have all different ways of visualizing your data. And I just chose Peru based on the population of the different cities. So I brought in a city file with all the cities and their populations. And they have 5 different types of visualization. So I'll just go through them one by one. And you can kind of play around with some of these other ones. So this is a clustering, and overall it's pretty good. I thought there would be a little bit more of a differentiation between Peru, which has a population of going on a little over 8 million, versus the second highest, which is basically 10 times. But so the relationship is kind of hard to work with in this, and that was one of my, I think one of the drawbacks with it. So configure, so we'll look at all the different ones real quick. So cluster, square grid, comes up with a nice square grid, and you can change the size. So 50 miles. And you can also change the map style in the back. So you can do it dark. And one of the things that I liked is you can interact with the satellite behind it. So if you're going to bring in Earth-based information or scientific data that's based on geography, you can scroll in and you can create the satellite as the background. I'll just stick with light for right now. So that was square grid. You have a hex grid, which is kind of the same thing, just different shape to it. Again, it's kind of hard to differentiate between some of the big changes between like Peru and some of the other cities. And Voronoi, which doesn't really work in this context. You'd want, I guess, higher granularity data for this. And then data elevation, which I didn't really get too much out of. But overall, I would encourage you to, work with this Mapbox API and just kind of like, kind of test it out, and maybe some of your data will, would look good with it. Overall, I thought there was a little bit, it doesn't have as much nuanced ability to actually interact with the visualizations, but you might find it helpful, and I think it's there, and I think it's going to continue to develop. So getting good with the Mapbox API is something that I definitely encourage you to do. So that's it for right now. If you have any questions, just let me know. If you need it, got any ideas, I'm always willing to kind of help out, and I'll put my email in the chat. So thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ozzy. Anyone have any questions on mapping? I know we've many of us have been doing a lot of mapping over the last few weeks. Oh, let's see. Does the shapefile, is the shapefile for the map background? I think that's the question.
No. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen anymore, I don't think. So, and that's, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
So that is, no. So this right here, if I took, so you can actually interact with this. So when you bring in the shapefile, that is no longer the background. It's interactable data. So you can click right here. You can get information with it. It acts kind of similar to ArcGIS. And that's the downside, is Tableau has a lot of really good background data. You can break maps up into counties and administrative units and show streets, but for the most part, you can't really interact with them. And that's the benefit of bringing in a shapefile, which a lot of times a local government is going to have a lot better sense of, exactly where their buildings are, where their streets are. You can get sewer line, water line, utility lines, all of that. And when you bring it in like this, you can actually interact with it. You can do analytics within Tableau, and you can interact with the rest of your data. It's not just like a background map that you can't really interact with.
Does that answer your question? Are there any other questions? Okay, hold on, wait, hold on. Okay. All right, now I'm going to share my screen. Now, are you, I guess are you looking at an airplane? Anyone?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I want to make sure you have I have the right screen for you to look at. So what I wanted to do here is just to do a little bit of a pivot as we close out the conversation, because I know a lot of us have been using some of the great tools that Tableau's made available with the dashboards with COVID-19. And, you know, I've been wanting to remind people of just like a few basic data visualization snafus that sometimes we can fall into. So so what we have here, you may have seen this before, maybe not, is there's something called a pertinent negative. And if any of you work in healthcare, as I do, or if you've even seen like a copy of your medical record, when you read it, you may go in there just to have, you know, maybe they put the stethoscope on your back and they listen to you breathe, but they have to do the pertinent negative. They have to say clear to auscultation. They have to comment on things that you did not present with, because it's called the pertinent negative. Because if they don't say that they looked at it and disregarded it, or that they measured it and it was negative, you can't assume that all is well and good. So what I like about this image that you're looking at here is these were World War II planes that came back, and these marks kind of represents, you know, where they were shot, where they were hit. And the first, you know, they were hit by German warplanes. So, you know, first look, they're like, wow, look at all the hits we have here. We need to make sure that we reinforce the plane in the wings and here and there and everywhere where the red spots are. And finally, it took somebody a very insightful critical thinker to say, wait a minute, these planes here made it back. We need to find out where the planes that weren't hit, what information are we missing? Because the planes that didn't make it back were hit somewhere else. So we can't necessarily make assumptions based on simply data that we have. We might need to reach out. And that's very applicable, the pertinent negative, when we're looking at some of the COVID-19 data, because we simply look at data that we have and we're not really thinking about what else needs to be added to the, survival bias is right, but what exactly is added to the conversation. And so these are things that I've been sharing on panel discussions, and I just wanted to show, I use a lot of drawings, graphics, and artwork before I jump into graphics. I just have one more I wanted to share. Then we're going to look at what the rest of the year looks like for the themes of some of our other meetings. But what I like about this second one, what I like about art when we're talking about graphics, is people don't get so startled, like, oh, I'm supposed to know what's going on in this graphic and I don't really know what's happening. It's a linear regression. Oh my gosh, what was that? What is that? But you can certainly develop different patterns of looking by looking through art. So this here is Cézanne's Bouquet of Peonies in a Green Jar. And it's from 1898. And there's been big discussion where some artists think, gosh, you know, is this an unfinished work? Is it a finished work? Is there information missing? What is it that we're looking at? Is this complete? Not is it finished, but is it complete? Do we have enough information that we can, you know, understand what it is we're actually looking at? I intentionally didn't say finished because, you know, any of us know when we're making visualizations, it's real easy to get a little overboard and add things that might not contribute, you know, to the conversation. So we have sometimes when there's a lack of information and people tend to accentuate what's there. And then you also have to be able to look at the void and say, what's not here? What are we missing in this conversation? And I felt like this was very pertinent when we were looking at the COVID-19 data. So basically, really quickly, what I want to show you before we hop back into our, and I'll take a look at questions, is, you know, I wrote this piece in response to a lot of questions that we were getting, and I encourage you to just go find it. I'll put a link in the chat for you. But what this is talking about is when we're looking at data, we have to be really, really careful because we saw all this great data coming out of the Johns Hopkins Resource Center. But what we didn't pay, or media, what the media wasn't paying enough attention to was that there's a lot of information missing. A lot of information missing to make predictive models, particularly, you know, to be accurate and meaningful. There was a lot missing that we couldn't really say about our own communities, because we had to realize that when we look at confirmed cases, all that meant was that they did have a test. We don't know what the algorithm was for them to qualify for the test. So if we think about it, we might think about if the sickest, like in my community, you basically have to have your lung hanging out your nostril before you can get one of these tests. But so if you are only testing very, very sick people, well, then you're going to see the confirmed cases kind of driving that fatality rate, right? Versus if we have, you know, a really good representation of community testing, and then we can coordinate a fatality rate. And then you can also ask other questions. Another pertinent negative is how are we defining if somebody died of COVID-19? There are a lot of bodies of people that weren't tested that are dying that we don't know. So what I'm trying to say, and what this article does a better job of than what I'm just trying to summarize in the time that we have, is there are a lot of things that when we put a visualization out there, we need to be responsible and make sure that we're being very clear and transparent on the limitations of what we're sharing with our audience. And I was sharing with somebody that, you know, I usually talk live. I do things where I might have COVID-19 data, not in this case, but it would have been like a data source. I would have loved to have done live with people and have them question and query, and we could have, you know, come to some of these conclusions together. But when you do things like on a webinar or WebEx in a workshop, you know, it's very finite. So you may not get that question that reminds you to clarify something that could be misleading. So I just want to caution those of us that might be tempted to do the visualizations that we also have to make sure that we're clarifying. Here's an Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation that I really, really like. A problem with this is that this whole shaded purple area right here is,
Bonnie, we're not seeing anything.
Oh, you don't see it?
We see your 2020 Piedmont tug planning.
All right, let me get out of the way. Wait, I have to, I'm trying to swap. How do I swap? I want to swap the screen so you can see the other one.
You just have to minimize that one.
Yeah, I thought I did. Hold on, give me a second. I minimized, but now I can't see it. Let me see. Oh, shoot. I'm not sure if I can. Oh, I know what I have to do. Hold on. I have to swap it. I need to get rid of this control. I don't see the swap screen here anywhere. Hold on. All right, we're not going to be able to see, you're not going to be able to see it, unfortunately, because I can't get this to swap. But you can still hear what I'm saying. And I'll share the link with you, but there's a lot of visualizations where we're not able to see, or we're not able to understand things that we don't understand. Like you'll see there is a big shaded area and people just don't even look at it. They're just basically looking at different measures, and they're distracted by some of those pre-attentive attributes. And what they see is these things that mean, well, this big shaded area in the back is actually indicating the uncertainty of the data. So we get distracted by looking at the things reaching up and looking at the slopes and the curves, and we forget that some of the data on the visualization may not be clear to a lot of people. So I'm going to share that link with you so you have it. I don't know what happened to my screen and why everything is, but I'll put it in the chat, and then we'll take a look at the Q&A. And I want to show you the next screen where we are looking at the what the themes are for the next meeting, because we're going to do next time we're going to be doing data modeling. And I know with Tableau, and I know that that's also very relevant to what we're doing with some of this COVID data as well. And then I think when we're going to have Sarah back, we're going to have her back for the fast facts and skill enhancements. If you've been to the conferences, sometimes they do things like 50 facts in 50 minutes or something like that. So we're going to kind of go back to our roots and do more of the things we learned about that maybe we forgot, that maybe we're not so sure about anymore, or how maybe some of the advances with Tableau have made some of the ways we used to do some things relatively obscure. Now, if there are any questions, we can take those now. Are there any questions from anybody? Brad, did you want to share anything at all?
I'm good. I really appreciate all the panelists and the folks showing up. I wish we could get together, but it doesn't seem to be possible for quite some time. So the only other question that we really have is, and you might want to put out on the chat or the Q&A session, is whether this time works better for you, or whether noon time or mid-morning or mid-afternoon works better.
What do people think about while we're doing this separately? What do people think about the time of day? Are their afternoons open, or are they still working? And so something in like around lunchtime would be too intrusive. I see some people saying that this time works for them. Does anybody see the big screen now, or do they see the slideshow screen?
Slideshow screen.
All right. So now what do you see?
Still the bigger slideshow.
I didn't want to give up on seeing if I could get this thing to view.
Teddy Roosevelt's quote.
Yeah, see, it's just not working. I'm sorry. I was trying to get it to show on the right screen. It opens up, but it's opening up on another screen. I don't know how to get it back. But so we'll stay in touch with how we're going to do the next one. We're reaching out to people. If you have ideas for presentations, maybe you have a project that you're trying to tackle, use the data family to see if you can, either get some support for some of the data you're doing, or, perhaps you have some data you want to present. I see what Dave's telling me. I'm trying to do, it's just not, give me 1 second. Okay, stop share. Share screen. There we go. Now you see it.
Yeah, now we see your blog entry.
So this is what I was trying to show you with the, really quickly with the dashboard for the COVID. And this is what the data that's in that Tableau dashboard that they created for us. This is the data that's fueling it. And what I wanted, and this was what I was talking about when they're doing projections, a lot of these predictive models that they do. A lot of times people are looking at, oh, look how many beds are here. And they're looking at these dotted lines here, and people don't know. I asked 3 people in one of my workshops, well, what does this mean? And nobody really knew. This is the uncertainty in these calculations. So that's not trivial. So things like that are really important to be able to speak about in a way that people that might be viewing your visualizations are clear on. Now, the Financial Times, if you're looking for data visualizations that are like as close to perfect as you can get, they're giving these for free during the COVID epidemic. So I would suggest that you use these as a guide. If you're trying to learn how to do these sorts of things, the Financial Times does a really nice job. And they also do a nice time using the logarithmic scale and explaining that you have to do it that way if you're comparing the rates on the same graph. And if you're not aware of the Tableau data, these dashboards are available for you to use with the data, and you can modify them, you can change the colors, you can do all of those sorts of things. So what's included in this discussion here is just a few things to look out for and to consider when you're creating these public health sort of visualizations. So I shared that with you, I think, in the chat. So I think we're pretty much done unless anyone has any last minute questions. I appreciate you, you know, sticking with us during this time. You know, I know it's a lot more fun when you can have a glass of wine and something yummy to eat, you know, and kind of be face to face with each other. But we're going to start like thinking of other ways to present information to you and to stay in touch. But for now, that's all I have for you. If anyone else wants to pipe up, that's fine too. Great article, by the way, Dave Powell. 538 is another. Financial Times and 538 have consistently been the voices of reason. A lot of people don't agree with showing it logarithmically. They want to see the S-curve. But when you can say to somebody, here's why I'm doing this, and you're transparent about your reasons why, then I feel like that transparency is great. And I think if that's it, I want to say good night to everybody. I think, will there be a video available, Rasta?
Yep, I'll go ahead and share it with you after the call.
All right, perfect, perfect. Everybody stay safe and stay in touch. And we'll regroup soon. You saw the schedule. We're scheduled to meet again in August. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe.